Hope is alive. It's been a tragic few days for our valley. It really has. And hearing on the news that we're not out of the woods yet. Tuesday's going to be a hard day, and I'm sure it just won't be stopping there. Had a lot of tragedy, a lot of loss, a lot of devastation. But hope is still alive, and you just need to know where to look. Bob and I were at the, where's Bob? Bob and I were at the evacuation centres 2 nights ago. We started off at Bowraville. The Anglican Church is still open. They thought about closing it, but it's still open and they're still helping people even now. And we were there for a little while, and then we got moved along to Maxwell High School, and we were trying to help some people there as well. There were a few dozen families that came through and needed some housing, and some people that needed some food, and we were there to chat to them. And it was pretty apparent 2 things. One is that it's a really hopeless situation, but 2, there is still hope if you know where to look for it. So I'll tell you a couple of stories. I was chatting to a guy, we were watching a guy that was there for most of the night actually. He came back 3 times, lives right up the far end of Boat Harbour Road, and he's pretty certain that his house is gone. But all night he just wanted to get back onto that road and get there and just check his property, check his house. And 3 times he came back because each time he said, I think I can go, I think I can get up there. And he'd get as far as the turn off, and they'd close the road at that point, and they'd turn him around and he'd come back. And he'd walk around in shock in the evac centre for a little while. And then after about 20 minutes, half an hour, he'd go, I'll just go again, I'll just check again. And he kept going up the road and kept trying to get home. About sort of 10:30, he left for the last time, and we didn't see him after that. So I don't know whether he did actually get home or whether he turned in for the night. But when you see his story, you see just his resilience and his determination to get home. He was determined to find some hope in that situation. I was chatting to another lady that was there who had come in, and she'd had to evacuate a home, and she'd managed to get a couple of her animals out. But while she was sitting there in the evac centre, she remembered that she hadn't opened the door of her bird cages. And she's sitting there in the evac centre with tears streaming down her face. I don't know if you remember this, tears streaming down her face. And she's just asking the fax people and us and anyone else who's around, do you think they'll be okay? Do you think they'll be okay? Do you think they'd be able to survive? Trying to hold on to the thought that there might be some hope for these birds. Another story, there was a guy, many of you would have seen him here last night, Tim. He as soon as he was evacuated, he grabbed his beautiful little staffy pup and started walking and walked his way into town. And he was saying, Paul and I were standing and chatting for a little while there, and he was saying to us that he spent the night by the river, didn't go to an evac centre, and he spent most of the day wandering around town just seeing whether anyone was around to help. And of course, town's fairly quiet on a Saturday for most of the day. And then he just sort of stumbled across us getting ready for the party. And he said to me that when he turned and he saw that we were in here and that we were preparing for something, it kind of gave him some hope, because he's like, hey, here's some people that might be able to help me. So the 2 things are that, yeah, it's a hopeless situation, but there's still hope if you know where to look for it. There's still hope if you know where to look for it. And I think when you talk to people like that, it's pretty clear that, yeah, there's not a lot to be hopeful about, but people still want to hang on to some sort of hope. Whether it's the hope of perhaps my property is still there, or whether it's the hope of perhaps my birds were able to survive, or the hope that maybe if I keep walking, I'll run into a group of people that might be able to give me a hand. People want some hope. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that we even crave hope in dark times. I think we go search it out. I think it's sort of like a magnet, really. We kind of, in the middle of tragedy, we try and find it wherever we can get it, because we want to hold on to something that gives us a little bit of hope. Not just bushfires either. I mean, I was sitting with a lady earlier this week who came in, and it was for a funeral that we were having here. And this lady, was sitting just in the room over there, and she was chatting through the details for the funeral, and she was sharing with me that a number of years prior, she'd had to do this exact same process for her late husband. And she had to prepare the funeral and go through all of that tragic circumstance there. And then a few years later, she finds herself in the same kind of circumstance, talking through the funeral plans for her mother-in-law. And she's quite upset, and we're talking through what the family wants for the funeral. And she says, I just never thought I'd be in this position again. Never thought I'd be in this position again. And I got to thinking through what she was saying. And towards the end of the conversation, she turns to me and I said, well, The church is here for you. If you need anything over the next few days, come and call, the weeks to come and call, and we'll make sure that we're around you and we can support you. And she leaves and she says, I hope things get better. I hope things get better. And I think that's a question we all ask from time to time, don't we? Well, I hope things get better. Can things get better? Is there better ahead? Where can I find some hope? Where can I find a brighter future? And we see that all around us. We hope for things to change, for circumstances to get better. But most of the time, the hope that we have isn't guaranteed. The hope that we have isn't guaranteed. And we look around us and no one has any guarantees what this fire is going to do next week. And when we're told there's a catastrophic day perhaps coming on Tuesday, and we've been told to prepare for that as best we can, but no one really knows. We have a hope that our community will pull through. We have a hope that things will get better, but we can't actually put our faith in that hope because that hope isn't dependent upon us. That hope is dependent upon so many external things that we have no control over whatsoever. So while people crave hope in dark times, there's not often a lot of hope that we can really hang ourselves on, that we can hang our faith on, that we can actually act upon with certainty. Judy before was talking about what is actually hope, and we'll use the word hope in so many different ways. We use the word hope to say, well, I hope that times get better, or we use the word hope to say, I hope you had a good day, or I hope that you're feeling better soon, or I hope that the stock market picks up, or I hope that I'll be able to do this in a couple of years. We use the word hope in so many different ways. And different types of hope mean different types of things. And I'm reminded in the Bible that it illustrates this difference between some of the different types of hope. In the book of Hebrews, it says this, in chapter 11, verse 1. It says this, what is faith? Well, faith is the confident assurance that something we want, something we hope for, is going to happen. It's the certainty that what we hope for is waiting for us, even though we cannot see it up ahead. Even though we cannot see it up ahead. And I think that's what we each want. I think that's what we each want, is we don't want to be placing our hope in something that we can't be certain of, right? We don't want to be placing our hope in something that's out of our control, that's in other people's hands, or that's in nature's hands, or that's in some other hands that we can't have control over. We want a hope that we can be firmly putting our faith in and acting upon. That's the sort of hope that we want. That's the kind of hope that we can build our lives upon, we can take action steps on. That's the kind of hope that will help us to move forward. That's real hope. That's real hope. I want to suggest to you this morning that hope can be real. Hope can be real. Hope doesn't have to be a fairy tale. Hope doesn't have to be something that we have no control over. Hope can be something that we can place our faith firmly upon. Do you have a hope like that? Do you have a hope like that? It's fine to say that you do have a hope like that. But what about when tragedy strikes? What about when times get tough? What about, like so many families in Barraville earlier this week, they looked across the ridge and they saw the outline of the fire over the hilltops? What if, like I was chatting to one of our church members the other day or last night and was saying that in the space of about 5 minutes, the fire went from not being seen at all, not being visible beyond the scope of the mountain ridge, to being right down the mountain in front of their eyes? Where does your hope sit in a moment like that? Is your hope real? Do you have real hope? I've heard story after story of people that have been through this exact same situation over the last couple of days. And I've noticed something about when they talk. Most of the time, with a few exceptions, and they're tragic exceptions, but most of the time, the people that we speak to aren't in fear for their lives as such. Most of the time, they're willing to evacuate. They can see that they have time to get out. Of course, some don't, and that is so tragic. But most of the time, the people that I've spoken to have been having more concern that they would lose their stuff, that they would have their property taken away, that they would have their houses destroyed, that they would lose sentimental items, photos, documents, things that they can't get back. And I wonder if, for many of us, we build our hope upon a whole range of different things. In fact, we probably build our hope upon like a basket of all of these different things. Yeah, our physical health, our physical safety is in there, but I think we also build our hope often upon the stuff that is a part of our lives. We build our hope upon what we have created, upon what we have obtained, on what we have worked hard to achieve, upon the things and the memories and the things that we carry with us, the sentimental items. We place our hope and our faith in some of those things. But what happens when some of those things are threatened? What happens when something out of our control, like a fire, seeks to come and take away all of those things that are bringing us our firm foundation? Where do we go then? I've heard so many people the last couple of days say something along the lines of, or a variant of these words, say something like, things can be replaced, but people can't. And I'm sure you've heard that too. And it's true. But we don't often live day to day like that. It takes something like a fire for us to realize that to be the case. And often, you only ever say that when the things that can be replaced have to be replaced. Does that make sense? When the things that can be replaced have to be replaced, we rationalize it by saying, well, it's okay because we can replace that, but at least we're okay. People can't be replaced. Wouldn't it be amazing if we lived our lives that way? Wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to live with that kind of hope before we needed it? Wouldn't that be incredible? So I want to say to you this morning that if the things that we have can be taken away, and if the hope that we have is quite often placed in those things, that there's a better place to have our hope this morning. There's a better place to have our hope. And not only can hope be real, but I think hope can be within. Hope can be within. And I think that's the distinguishing fact between the sort of hope that we're talking about today. Hope can be real, but hope can also be within. Now you might say to this point, you know what, Matt, I have a hope within. Yeah, I have a hope inside. I'm a pretty optimistic kind of person. I'm a pretty hopeful kind of person. I'm a glass half full kind of person. But here's the question. Is the hope that you profess really inside of you, or is the hope that you profess a strong hope in something external? Because plenty of optimistic people are optimistic up until the point when they lose everything. Because there comes a point after which the thing you place your hope upon is either out there, out of your grasp, or it's in here and it's within your grasp, and you can firmly build your life upon it. It's possible to have a hope inside you that doesn't rely upon the existence of any other thing. Doesn't rely upon the possibility or the necessity of circumstances changing for it to be real. Doesn't rely upon waiting to see. Doesn't rely upon hoping to find out, but solely relies upon something within. A hope that doesn't get blown out when disappointment or tragedy strikes, but a hope that you can hold on to. But what's that type of hope? What's the distinguishing characteristic of that type of hope? Well, I'll tell you what it isn't first. The distinguishing characteristic of that sort of hope within is not how much you want it. It's not how much you want it. My daughter, 5 years old, wishes and hopes with her entire heart for a unicorn for Christmas. I kid you not. I have so much sadness or empathy for Santa Claus when it comes to Christmas time, when we take her to the shopping center for the photo, because he's going to have some explaining to do. She wants a unicorn, and she believes if she wishes for it enough, she can make it happen. But how many of us live our lives that way, right? If only I have enough faith that I'm a good person, surely that'll be enough in eternity. If only I have enough faith that things will work out all right, well, yeah, surely that will happen. If only I have faith that I can will something into existence by my own positive thoughts, friends, it's never going to happen. Because the fundamental law of the universe is that this world is flawed and it was our fault. That the world was created perfect, and yet through our own self-indulgence we seek to create. We seek to will our own will into being at the expense of others. So no amount of self trying to materialize a positive future is going to do that for us, friends. Because so much of that is dependent upon other people, and they're all trying to do the same thing. And at some point, it's a zero-sum game. If I want what's good for me and you want what's good for you, then one of us is probably going to lose out. It's not the way of Christ. It's not the way of Christ. The distinguishing mark of this kind of hope, this real internal within hope that you can build your life upon, that you can take to the bank, it's not how much you want something. Not at all. Maybe this will help you to explain what I'm talking about. In Hebrews chapter 6, it says this. It'll come up on the screen. Thanks, Cater. This hope, this confident assurance that we have, is an anchor for the soul. Just take that in for a second. It's an anchor for the soul. Do you feel like you need an anchor today? Do you feel like you need an anchor this week? It cannot slip and it cannot break down under whatever pressure bears upon it. It's a safe and steadfast hope that enters within the veil of the heavenly temple, the most holy place in which the very presence of God himself dwells, where Jesus has entered in advance as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. At this point, you're saying, Matt, you said that'll explain things. What's this about veils and Melchizedek? Might sound a little bit strange. Without trying to bore you with all the details, let me explain the context for this verse. When the book of Hebrews was written to the Jews were a people who knew God but didn't understand Jesus. They expected him, but they didn't understand him. What they knew is that God was far from them. That's what they knew. They knew that in order to have relationship with God, they had to go through an intermediary, a priest. In fact, they had priests, and then they had a high priest. The role of the high priest, amongst many other things, was to offer the yearly sacrifice. And he was the only one who was allowed to go and actually meet face to face with the presence of God in a place called, wait for it, the most holy place. Imaginative name, I know. He'd go in through the holy place. Then he would have up to 300, we're told, priests help him to move the veil out of the way so that he could enter into the most holy place. He could do it once a year. And in that most holy place, he would be in the presence of God and he would offer a sacrifice. And in that place, the sacrifice would be accepted by God and the people would be forgiven from their sins and God would still be happy with the people. Now, this was no ordinary curtain, no ordinary veil we're talking about. We're told that it's something like 3 inches thick. We're told that it's something like 20 meters high, something like 10 meters wide. This is a big, heavy curtain blocking the holy place from the most holy place. Now, Melchizedek was an interesting priest. The reason that Melchizedek is written in there is for 2 reasons. One is that it's written to Jewish people and they had a history. It's like for us saying, let's refer to someone in Australian history to make a point. They knew Melchizedek. They knew him to be a priest. He was also a king, but he was an interesting example to choose because Melchizedek was the priest that actually offered forgiveness of sins through bread and wine. Now we see that as a prophecy of what Jesus would later do. Not through bread and wine, but through his body and his blood, that he could offer forgiveness of sins. So to say Jesus is in that line, all of a sudden the Jewish people's ears are pricking up, going, there's something interesting going on here. I don't quite understand, but there's something interesting going on here. So what's the significance of the story? Why are we talking about that in the context of hope as an anchor for the soul? Well, when Jesus was crucified on that Friday, we're told by all 3 of the eyewitness accounts that write about this that there was an earthquake. The earthquake was so severe at the moment of Jesus' death that the ground shook and that the curtain in the temple tore in two. In fact, it tore in two, not from the bottom to the top, as if any man could rend it apart and rip it to the ceiling, but it tore in two from the ceiling to the floor. This was not just any earthquake damage. This was symbolic. This was prophetic. This was God saying that something new has happened here, and the distinction between what is holy and what is unholy no longer exists. The distinction between who can enter my presence and be with me and who is relegated to the external extremities of the temple does not anymore exist. In fact, what this proves, what this shows, is that God was placing his seal upon the sacrifice of Jesus and accepting that sacrifice. You see, Jesus had come and he'd come into the world preaching this brand new way of relating to God. And people didn't understand it. He preached that You could have relationship with God, that there is a new kingdom at work, a new kingdom of God, where things don't happen the way things happen in the world. A new kingdom in God, under God's rule, where we can have direct access. In fact, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. To which the Jewish audience said, well, hang on, what about the priests? What about the sacrifices? Jesus is saying, I will offer the most perfect sacrifice as the Son of God myself. That will be accepted on your behalf. And you can enter into the very presence of God. So when the curtain tears in two, when the veil is torn from top to bottom, God is putting his seal upon that sacrifice. God is saying, I accept that sacrifice, as painful as it is to me, because I want a new kind of relationship with you. You can enter into the most holy place. How does this become an anchor for our souls? Well, it's good news, my friends. Because instead of having to place our faith in something that's external to us, instead of having to place our faith in the priest's ability to go and minister before God and plead our case and offer the sacrifices and hope that at some point they will be accepted. At some point God will say, that's enough. Your sin is taken away. I can be in relationship with you. Instead of that, we can have an assurance that God himself, through an internal sacrifice, through his own Son, through the perfect Lamb of God, was laid upon the altar and sacrificed for us. No longer, my friends, do we have to wait for external things to change. No longer do we have to wait for someone else to offer to take us into the presence of God. We can have the certainty and the assurance that we can stand in God's presence and that we are welcome in God's presence. Not only are we welcome in God's presence, but we are invited to come into God's presence. God is saying, I will be with you. All you have to do is believe that Jesus has made the way for the curtain to be torn. No longer do you have to go through a priest or a rabbi or a guru or any other kind of spiritual advisor to get to God, because God himself will meet with you directly. And if you can meet with God directly, isn't that something worth placing hope in? Isn't that something placing hope in? There's an old song that we used to sing not so long ago that says, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone, because I know he holds the future. In fact, we don't have to worry about what tomorrow brings. That's not to say that fires won't come on Tuesday. That's not to say that the things around us won't be taken away. But it is to say that we can place our hope in something stronger. We can place our hope in something that can never be taken away, and that is the presence of God within our very souls. You know how I told you that hope can be within? Let me tell you why that's so important. Because not only our stuff can be taken away, our very bodies are decaying day by day. There'll come a day where they stop working. There'll come a day where your heart will stop beating. Your body will be useless to you anymore, and it will feed worms. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's true. Some of us will feed a few more worms for a little bit longer than some of the rest of us. But that's where we're all going. Max Lucado famously said, when life is over, it all goes back in the box. At that point, my friends, your soul continues. Your soul continues. And if you have lived in the presence of God because of the sacrifice of Jesus, you will continue to live in the presence of God because of the sacrifice of Jesus. Sure, the container may change. Sure, the body may not work anymore, but you will still be in that relationship. God calls us home to be with him, not because of any circumstances changing, not because of us wanting it or willing it into existence, but because there was an internal sacrifice that was paid on our behalf. That is, according to Jesus, the only way for us to enter into the presence of God. Now, either he's a liar or he's the greatest gift to humanity that we have ever received. But here's why that is so important. Because if God is a liar, God isn't God. Think about that for a second. If God is a liar, God isn't God. How could God be God and be a liar? If God is in control of all things, if God is in all things and through all things, if God created all things, if God holds all things together into being, God himself has provided the sacrifice for us to be in relationship with God himself. God himself has provided the lamb for that sacrifice. God himself has accepted that sacrifice. How can that not be true? God is God, and God cannot be a liar. This verse is saying there is a slightly different kind of hope, and it's the inner hope that God gives to us. Let me finish with one more thought. Hope is real, hope is within, but hope can also be shared. Hope can also be shared. Amanda and I got a message, or a couple of messages, yesterday morning, because we'd planned in advance to do this party. In fact, Roxy and Rob came to me a couple of months ago and said, got this great idea for us to have, let's have a meal in our backyard, let's invite all the neighbours. And we thought, great, what an amazing idea, let's do that. We took it to the leadership team. Leadership team said, what a brilliant idea, a God-inspired idea, let's throw our resources into it and do it. So we pulled together a team and we worked hard, we made it all happen, and that's what we were going to do. But I got a message, or a few messages like yesterday morning, saying, well, we can't do this anymore, obviously. We can't continue this. The valley is hurting. The devastation's too great. We can't spend all day partying. And we thought about it, and we prayed about it. And it became pretty clear pretty early on that this was not a surprise to God. The fires were not a surprise to God. God knew that this was going to happen. I don't know how that works. I don't know how God knows about the existence of pain that's coming down the road. I don't quite understand that one. But what I do understand is God knew it was coming, and he had prepared comfort in advance. In fact, God knew it was coming, and he had prepared us to be ready for that day. Let me tell you how that day came about. Roxy and I were sitting down with 3 calendars. It was Roxy's calendar, my calendar, and the kitchen calendar. We had a calendar up there that says where all our core lunches and everything are. And we were just trying to pick out Saturdays. You remember we were trying to pick out Saturdays in November. And I actually wanted to go the week before. wanted to go the week before. And we were trying to look through the dates, and, we can't do this one, you know, I'm working here, can't do this one, I've got this thing on here, got this thing. And eventually we said, well, actually, this is probably the only one we can do. And reluctantly, I don't mind saying to you, reluctantly, I said, okay, well, we'll just have to do it that date. But there was nothing coincidental about it, because God knew that our community would need comfort, that the church would need to be vocal, and that we would need to draw people into God's house. You see, hope can be shared. Now, it does you no good to hear about my hope this morning. Does you no good to hear about somebody else's hope this morning? Because although hope can be shared, you can't place your faith on something external. Remember, it's got to be internal. So while hope can be shared, you do have to reach out and grab it. You do have to reach out and take it. Hope has to be made yours. Here's how that works. For many in the room, you've already made this decision. At some point, you think it through. You say, God has made a bridge, made a way for me to come into direct contact with him, for me to place my hope and my faith in something that will not change and shift like shifting shadows, but something that will last. He's actually gone the whole way, paid for it in advance, and accepted the payment. And by placing our faith in that, by placing our faith in the claim of Jesus that as the Son of God, he is the way, the truth, and the life, we find our soul in direct connection with God, not just in this life, but for eternity. That's as simple as it is, my friends. You may not be sure. You might be skeptical. You may not know how that all works out in terms of the universe. You know what? Neither does anyone. But I guarantee you this, when you call on the name of God, when you stand in his presence and you can have direct conversation with him one-on-one because of the blood of Jesus shed for you, he hears your prayer. Not only does he hear your prayer, but he responds. Now, sometimes he will take the fire and stop it from hitting your house. Other times he will come with his arms of love, wrap them around you, and he will give you comfort, strength, and a peace that you never knew you had in spite of everything. But either way, your soul is tied to his for eternity. This morning I want to ask you a simple question. Where is your hope? Where is your hope? An old song says, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, for all other ground is shifting sand." We've had a tragic week. There may be another one to come. But I can tell you that it can't be bad enough to separate you from the love of God, because he has reached out and placed it within you if you choose to accept it. Let's all stand. Let's all stand where we are. I wonder if the country band can come up. We're going to sing a song. But it would be remiss of me this morning to finish this message in these circumstances, talking about placing our trust and faith in God, without giving you an opportunity to do just that. You may not know what that means. You might not have any idea what you're getting yourself into. Like I said, none of us do. But I do know this. The God who created you, created the universe, has done everything that needs to happen. All you need to do is say, "You know what, God? I'm going to give this a go. I've tried relying on myself and my own hope and my own working and understanding of how everything works for far too long, but I'm going to believe that Jesus was your son, and I'm going to believe that he did do this for me." That's all you've got to do. You just say that to God, and he will do the rest. In fact, we're told in Scripture that at that moment, your soul is united with his for eternity. We're told at that moment, your name gets written in what's called the Lamb's Book of Life. Now, is that a real book or a figurative book? I'm not even going to go there, but it's a place where God records your name and says, he or she is mine because I bought them at a cost. And they're going to be with me in paradise for eternity. Let's all close our eyes. We're going to sing in just a moment, but I'm going to pray a prayer. I'm not going to ask anyone to come forward.